Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone to the final keynote. It's my third keynote and I changed the titles around. This was supposed to be the first one on Monday, but I thought, because this I think is one of the most important, even though it's not about Risale directly, I thought this is the most important because it shows us to a certain extent why we have forgotten about God. For those of you who weren't here, the first two, I was trying to explain to my Ma'navi family, my brothers, that our foundation, which is the International Foundation for Muslim Theology, has as its main goal the teaching of what we call God talk or Allah talk. In other words, bringing God back into the heart of Muslim life. Because, particularly in Islamic schools. Islamic schools, exactly like the secular system, are completely broken. They think that Islamic education means teaching from Western textbooks and then just occasionally throwing in a hadith or an ayah, and that makes it Islamic. God is never spoken about. It's a strange noise coming from the screen.
No, it's from the toilet.
It's the same. It's the same.
The screen is getting good.
It may need it after this. They say, well, what are we doing wrong? You know, we're mentioning hadith occasionally, ayah occasionally, but they never mention God, they never mention Allah. Allah has no centrality in their teachings. And we know from reading the Risalah that, and reading Quran, Allah is mentioned 3,000 times, His names are mentioned countless times. We know that the creation is built on the pillars of the names. We know that Sayyid Nursi's theology is the theology of the names. And I tell them, look, we live in a secularized, not just in a secularized society, and in a secularized civilization, but we live in a secularized universe. And the secularization of the universe has been happening for the past 500 years. And it began in the it's difficult to pinpoint when it actually began. But it began with the voyages of discovery and the so-called scientific revolution in the 16th century and the 17th century. And because there are lots of scientists here, I thought it might be very interesting for you to know the part that your predecessors played in the destruction of this edifice of the divine names. So I tell them, at first they find it strange when I talk about living in a secularized universe. How can the universe be secularized? They understand how society can be secularized, because all societies are secularized, all education systems are secularized, including Islamic education systems. And that they are the most dangerous ones because they make a division, whereas in secular schools, atheistic, materialist schools, they're not getting mixed messages. They're just getting wrong messages. But in Islamic schools, they're getting mixed messages. They're teaching the Cambridge curriculum, which is written by materialist scientists, with all the wrong language, causality, and all of the wrong phraseology. And then they're stitching onto it a few hadith and a few ayah. It's like stitching a living organ onto a dead body, right? It doesn't benefit the dead body, and that living organ also dies, it shrivels. So I try to explain. They say, well, how did this happen? We didn't suddenly become secular. The universe didn't suddenly lose God. What happened? So I try to tell them in 8 short slides. So if we can go to slide 2. Can you read this at the back? Can you see it? Is it clear? It's difficult. Sorry, it might be the camera.
Can you zoom in?
Yes.
Is that better?
Better.
So it's undoubtable that prior to the 16th century, and of course I'm talking about the 16th century AD, the universe was understood by all religions, all monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, to be a representational universe. What do I mean by representational universe? Right from the beginning, I want to make it a bit interactive to make it less just me talking. Yeah.
Representation, as in perhaps ishara, meaning pointing to something?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm thinking of the main three monotheistic faiths, Christianity, Judaism and Islam. And they believed in a universe that is characterized by being representational. In other words, all three faiths believed that the universe is created, it's limited, it's finite, and it's dependent. And these characteristics imply the existence of a creator who is other than that. He is unlimited, absolute, self-sufficient, and totally independent. And the cosmology and the ontology of these three religions was very, very similar. Now, we know that there are lots of differences in law and legal theory, in ritual and practice, but the cosmologies of the three faiths were very, very similar. The universe is a representation of its creator's attributes. You'll find this in Christian theology, you'll find it in Jewish theology, and particularly in Jewish mysticism. And of course, you find it in Islam, and you find it in the Quran. The universe is the place where God's attributes are manifest. To help us, if we can go to slide 3, which should have a nice picture on it. Okay, if you can see this, this may help us to conceptualize the underlying structure of reality as understood by the three faiths. So we have a circle there, right? If you can just bring it over so everyone can see the circle in full. Right. This circle is the totality of existence, if you like. Now, no pictorial representation is going to be perfect, right? No picture is going to be able to show the reality of things as they are. It's just to help us. So the circle is the totality of existence. The outer edge, the circumference of the circle, is the corporeal world, or what we call alam al-mulk. It's the very, very, very thin outer edge of the circumference of this circle. And that is where we are in alam al-mulk, or alam al-shahada, if you wish. It's the visible realm. It's the realm of flesh and blood. It's the realm of time. It's the realm of attributes reflected. It's the realm of matter. It's the realm of stuff. It's the realm of things. Everything we can see around us. So this is alam al-mulk. It's the realm of sensory perception. It's the visible, corporeal world that we can see, we can touch, we can smell, and we can sense with our senses, right? I'm trying to do two screens at once. The point at the center is absolute Geyve. It's absolute divinity, or as Shukran Wahide calls it, Godhead, right? In our own Islamic tradition, we call it the realm of God as he is in and of himself. And therefore it's indescribable, and for that reason here it's typified by a dot, which has no extension. So that typifies God. God is at the center of all things. The corporeal world, alam al-mulk, is the circumference of the circle, and the inner part of the circle is the Geyve, or malakut. This is a very crude representation, but it's crude for a reason, because this would have been accepted by all three faiths before the 15th and 16th century. So if you read Jewish theology, if you read our own philosophy and theology in our Islamic tradition, and if you read Christian theology, if you read Aquinas, for example, or any of the great theologians, they believe basically in a tripartite universe. In other words, there is mulk, there is malakut, and there is Geyve. Of course, Malakut is Geyve Nesbi. We call it Geyve Nesbi because there are parts of Malakut that we can't access. And Geyve, of course, is Allah's essence, as He is in and of Himself. And basically, all of the three faiths will have accepted this. So if you'd explain what I've just been saying to a Christian, an educated Christian in the 14th century, or to an educated Jew, and obviously to an educated Muslim, they would have all agreed that more or less, yes, we believe in the same thing. There are other designations such as Jabarut, for example, Mulk, there is Malakut, there is Jabarut. There are different categorizations, but Sayyid Nursi uses basically Mulk and Malakut. Maybe once or twice he mentions Jabarut, but it doesn't play a huge part in his cosmology. So basically, this also, in a sense, corresponds to the tripartite nature of human beings, because we have a body, right, which is Alam al-Mulk. We have a nafs, which is between Alam al-Mulk and Alam al-Malakut, and we have a ruh, which is in a sense typifies the Dhat of Allah, according to the Risale. So it's a tripartite division. And again, Christians would have understood this, Jews would have understood this. Ordinary people, ordinary believers would have understood that everything points to God. There are lots of stories in our tradition about, for example, a wise man asked an old man or an old woman, how do you know that God exists? And they'll say, well, look, I can see the prints of the camel in the sand, so I know that a camel exists. And from that you can extrapolate. Very, very simple proofs. Basically, the universe is representational up to this point. But then this begins to change. And as I said before, it's very difficult to pinpoint when the change occurs. When does the universe stop being a mirror of God? Stop, yes.
Stop.
It doesn't stop. But when do religions start to lose their grasp on this notion that the universe is representational? In Islam it didn't stop. But the change starts in Europe, right? You know, we know the sun sets in the west, right? The sun of religion set in the west. So how did it happen? Now, if we look firstly at our own tradition, just to contextualize it, if we can go to 4. Islam is the paradigm of representationality. And therefore, the paradigm shift that happened in Christianity, particularly in Christianity, because Judaism is not playing a really big role at this time. The paradigm shift occurs in the Western world, geographically the Western world, because today when I say the West, I don't mean the geographical West, because we have Australia, we have Japan, we have China, we have India, all of whom are showing signs of Westoxication, as they say. If we start with our own tradition, and again, I'm not going to really rely on my notes, we know that the Quran is a book which actually typifies this notion of representationality. There are more than 350 references to the word ayah or ayat, meaning either verse or sign. And they are the same thing, because the signs in creation are the verses of the book of creation. So right from the very beginning, right from the time that the Quran was revealed to our Prophet ﷺ, Muslims knew that the universe was representational, just as the Christians before them had known in their own way. But when we get to the 16th century, it changes in Europe, as we'll see. And which of the bounties of your Lord would you deny? Surah Rahman. All bounties are signs and all signs are bounties. I don't need to tell you these, you know these. He shows you his signs, so which of the signs of Allah do you deny? It's all about signs, it's all about representationality. It's all about things which make ishara to the Creator, right? The book of creation. Everywhere you look there is Wajhullah. The universe is a mirror, if we now think of the Risale Nur, the universe is a mirror in which the names and attributes of God are reflected. And we know that Adam alayhi salam and every single Adam, every single human being was taught all of the names. So in every facet, in every aspect of our deen, there is this notion that the world is a mirror which reflects the names of Allah. And in the medieval period, this was the same for Christians, at least for the Christian theologians, in theory. If you read their books, if you read the books of St. Anselm, if you read the books of Thomas Aquinas, if you read Augustine, if you read all of the Christian theologians, even in the Bible, even in the Gospels, it says the universe shows the handwork of Allah, the handicraft of Allah, of God. So this was universal. People up until the 15th century, around the 15th century, they lived with the names of Allah. They lived in a universe which they saw as pointing to the same. Whether they were scholars, whether they were ordinary people. For them it was very, very normal to talk about the creation as God's handiwork. Something that God has made. This was more or less universal.
Sorry, what was the motivation to get out of that concept?
This is where we're going now. Next. So what I wanted to do with showing you things like Fada'iyya Ghayratukum Tukadiban and all of these things, the number of ayats, was to show you that our tradition, Quran, preserved this notion of representationality. And of course, we have in the Risale Nur a supreme example of that notion being preserved. And we've seen it in every century with every mujaddid. But in the West, unfortunately, there was a desacralizing and secularizing revolution. And if I can find my notes on that slide. I'm going to have to shorten them because there's so many. This is a sort of a 2-hour lecture which I'm trying to do in half an hour. So it's beyond the scope of this lecture because we only have a short time. To take you through the genesis of how exactly it happened, like century by century, occurrence by occurrence, trend by trend, current by current. Because it didn't happen overnight, it's cumulative, right? It's like a river that starts at the top of a mountain, it's just a little trickle. It's difficult to find a little trickle of water where the river starts. But as it flows, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it's a river and until it goes to the sea. So I can't do that. I don't have the time to do that. But there was a radical change in how people viewed the universe. And it moved from a representational universe where people felt themselves intimately connected to the universe to a universe which was distant and which became an object and which became separated. So there was a gradual change of consciousness. Now, again, the strategies that were used or the mechanisms by which this occurred, again, are too long to go into, but there was a change of consciousness, and I will try to give some sort of indications of how it happened. It was first preceded by the Renaissance, where they went back to Greek learning, and Greek learning became for them the criterion rather than biblical learning. For our part, our problem was that we relied a lot on Aristotle rather than Plato, but that's a different issue. They relied on Aristotle. And Aristotle's God is within the creation, not outside of the creation. So that is one problem. When they go back to the Renaissance, and they start, when they are in the Renaissance and they go back to Hellenistic and Greek philosophy, they choose Aristotle as their mentor rather than Plato. But again, that's a different argument. So there was a change of consciousness that started with the Renaissance, then by the voyages of discovery. So we get Columbus going to the so-called New World, and then we get the maritime nations starting to colonize different countries and to bring back spices and slaves and all of these things. We get the voyages of discovery. And shortly after that, we get the scientific revolution, the so-called scientific revolution. And so we have scholars of astronomy such as Copernicus and Galileo and Newton, and we have later the philosophical currents started by people like Descartes. And they affected a revolution in the physical sciences that dealt a severe blow to the idea of the universe as a place where God is represented. One after the other. And again, I can't really go into much detail about it because it's too long. But with, for example, Copernicus and Galileo, do we have any experts in astronomy here? But I'm sure you've read the background to this. With Copernicus and Galileo, prior to them coming on the scene, the Earth had a central position. It had a central position in Islam, it had a central position in Judaism, it had a central position in Christianity. The Earth was the subject of divine lutuf, of divine grace. It was the center of human activity, and human being is ashaful makhluqat. So the Earth had a very, very special place. Now with Copernicus and Galileo, the special position that the Earth once enjoyed, the center of divine attention, and humankind is the most noble of all created beings, that special position is thrown out. Because they say there is no center. These guys said there is no center to the universe. The Earth is not in the center of the universe. It does not occupy a special position. And of course we know with the Galilean revolution and the Copernican revolution, the old Ptolemaic system whereby the sun revolves around the Earth was reversed. Instead of the sun revolving around the Earth, now we have the Earth revolving around the sun. This is not a scientific change. These things are actually not scientifically testable, even today. It's impossible to say whether the sun moves around the Earth or whether the Earth moves around the sun. Although scientific consensus has it that we live in a heliocentric universe, whereas for 2,000 years we lived in a geocentric universe. And Einstein himself admitted that there is actually no way of showing, because of relativity, which one is true. So this was an ideological paradigm shift. This was not a scientific paradigm shift, because none of it is testable. It was an ideological shift in order to make the value of the Earth so small that we would no longer give it the importance that it enjoyed under the aegis of the three religions. So the Earth, instead of being the center of divine attention, just think how Allah talks about the Earth in the Quran, right? How He spreads it out, how He puts a lamp, how He puts a light, how He gives us all of the things that we have. Yes.
Yeah, Allah says, خَلْقُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ.
Yes.
The samawat
Yes.
and the ard, as if they were the same.
Absolutely.
And it explains why.
But unfortunately, after Copernicus and after Galileo, the Earth becomes just a tiny dot in the outer reaches of some distant galaxy, on some spiral somewhere out there. And occasionally you'll see YouTube videos or you'll see schemata where, you know, they start on the Earth and then they pull back. You know, they pretend that they're going, you know, billions of light years away, and where's the Earth? You can't see where the Earth is. The Earth is so distant that you can't even see it. It's a kind of istighfaf, right? You have the word in Turkish as well, right? istifaf. It's making the earth so small that it's not important.
Belittling.
It's a belittling of the earth. And this is purposeful. This is not the result of scientific endeavor and scientific experiments. This is an ideological move, right?
I think, there was a change in the West. For example, they discovered that the Earth is not in the center. I think the Muslims discovered that before. The Earth is not in the center, but they discriminate being center in spiritual sense or in the material sense. I think
Yes.
Muslims divided this to two. So.
There's no way of proving that the earth is not in the center of anything. There's no way of proving where the center is. There's no way of testing it. It's absolutely not amenable to the scientific method.
Yeah, that's.
But you make a very, very good point, because it's a bit of a digression. Because do we live in a heliocentric world or do we live in a geocentric world? Well, from a spiritual point of view, you can say that we live in a heliocentric world because we are the ones who revolve around Allah, right? We revolve around the Kaaba, and Allah is in the center. But that doesn't mean that actually we really live in a heliocentric world. We can't tell. Because we see the stars revolving around us. We see the sun moving around us, right? Our eyes don't lie. We're told that the sun isn't moving, we're moving. There's no way of proving that.
Well, I think we need to examine this a bit further, scientifically speaking, if this is possible.
You can't do it.
That in the universe you can take certain as reference point, and then you can see where you are, how you coordinate it, etc.
You can only do that if you know where the edge is.
That's
But locally in our galaxy we are doing it. In our galaxy. So I think it would be difficult to support what you are saying.
Einstein said this. Einstein said we cannot know whether we
Okay,
actually.
Einstein also made a mistake on MC square.
Hocam, the 15 word actually talks about this.
Muslim scientists in the 1,000 years claimed that the Earth was revolving around the sun. 1,000.
Yes.
So since then, Muslim scientists are saying the same.
Not all. Not all. Some of them, yes.
Yeah, but
it's still untestable. It's still untestable.
we'll get back to you.
We'll get back to it. Yeah, we can get back to it. The point is.
Hocam, why is physical centrality of the planet matters?
So
Like, does it have any significance in like spiritual
No, it doesn't.
importance?
No, it doesn't.
It is like
No,
unrelated.
for you it may not, and for me it may not. But the point is, the intentionality behind what happened was to reduce the Earth to nothing.
And
And
also,
that had a
like
huge
spatial
effect.
scale doesn't also matter. So Earth is small, but physically small.
maybe
Well,
for
It
you
doesn't
to
mean
say
anything.
this is influencing certain people.
It
That's
Yes.
what I'm trying to reveal.
It mattered to the
Right.
medievals.
For medievals,
Yes.
yeah.
It
Even
mattered
now
to the
it
medievals.
matters. Yeah.
You have to see what comes afterwards. So bear with me, right?
Yeah.
So what happened after that was the universe started to be seen in terms of mathematics and geometry. In other words, rather than in terms of representation, it was seen in terms of quantification. With the coming of the scientific revolution, I'm not trying to dismiss science, please. I know I'm not a scientist, but that doesn't mean I'm dismissing science. This was ideological and philosophical. There was no science involved, really, apart from observational science. But Ptolemy had also observed and come to a different conclusion that had lasted for 2,500 years. I'm not taking sides, and I'm not saying that it has an effect on us spiritually, but it had a huge effect in Europe. It had a huge effect on believers in Europe. So this is the first nail in the coffin of the representational universe in Europe. And at this point, God is not actually denied Are we on number 5 now? Is this 5? It is, yeah. God wasn't actually denied, which was very clever. They wanted to get rid of God. But they realized that God has his uses. So instead, God's place in the scheme of things becomes very vague. When you render the earth unimportant, you also render God unimportant. God becomes sidelined. Okay? So when you have a belief system in which the earth has a special place, when the earth no longer has a special place, then its creator no longer has a special status also. And Newton takes this one step further. Even though Newton was always talked about as being a believer, he was a deist, he wasn't a theist. In other words, he believed that God started everything in the beginning, and then everything then continues on, almost on autopilot automatically. So Newtonian physics was a second nail in the coffin of representationality. So deism is the system of belief in which God loses his absoluteness. God becomes the prime mover. He becomes the first cause, and then every other cause then has agency. So he becomes what we've been talking about as the constitutional monarch.
Big Bang theory is the same.
Yeah, and it's a theory, right?
Theory, exactly.
It might be the best one we have at the moment, but it doesn't mean it's the one. If we can go to the next one. Then we get the philosophers in the 16th, 17th and 18th century, just prior to the Enlightenment. Of course, we also got the Industrial Revolution. These things all feed into each other, right? You've got the voyages of discovery where Europe is in the ascendancy and it has the arrogance of maritime power, the ability to colonize. You've got Copernicus saying the earth is not important and God is sidelined. You've got Newton who, with his great success, is consolidating this idea of deism, that God, okay, he exists, but he's at the beginning of things. And we don't know how things were at the beginning. All we know is we live in this world which is ordered and mechanized. It becomes a machine. And it's all quantifiable. Quantification becomes important. Representation is no longer important. It's for simple people. Scientists want to quantify, they want to measure, because they think that they can get the answers to the big existential questions by measurement, by going into matter, by understanding what matter is. With Descartes, who probably is the most insidious and most dangerous and toxic of all of the scholars of this period, it reaches a high point. Because Descartes, apart from his famous cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, he famously claimed that beings are of two kinds. Things that can be measured and explained with mathematical calculations. I don't mean measuring a table. I mean measuring things like mass and velocity and all of the things that scientists measure which we can't actually see. He said there are two kinds of things. Things which can be measured and can be explained with calculations and theories and predictions. And things which could be only imagined. And I think I've got the Latin there. The res extensa means the corporeal world, the world of matter, the world of extended stuff, basically. Things you can measure. Those are the only things which are important. He said the rest of the things are what he calls res cogitans, the product of the mind. Now, what are the things included in this category? Values, colours, smells, love, hate, lata'if, belief. All of these things, he said, were subjective because they can't be measured. So he actually now actively secularizes the universe. Anything you can measure its mass and velocity, you can you know, time and distance and all of these things. You can calculate, you can reach hypotheses. All of these things matter, he said, but everything else is subjective. Why should we believe someone who says they love someone? You can't measure love. Right? He said these are subjective things. And as a result, there's a bifurcation. There's a splitting. The road splits. It splits into two. So first, there are the things that can be measured, the world of numbers, equations, mathematical and scientific theories. Only these were real for Descartes. The rest was subjective. And therefore you can dismiss it. Right? God is subjective. You can't measure God. It becomes subjective. So the famous thing, you do you, I'll do me, right? You believe in your God, I'll believe in whatever I want. Because it's all subjective. Can't prove it. Can't measure it. Can't quantify it. So there is a split which happens here between the corporeal world, the world in which we live and which we can understand through our senses. We can smell, we can value, we can love, we can hate, we can interact, we can have ideas about the world, we can have beliefs about the world. All of these are subjective, he said, because you can't measure them. And then there's the other world, which they call the physical world. Now, when I say physical world, I don't mean physical as in material. I mean the world that the physicists deal with, which is a world of quantity only. So this was Descartes, and the implications of this, and I'm talking again about the West, the implications of this were severe, because prior to this, the world was a unity, right? The world was a unity, we've seen it. There was Mok, there was Malakut, there was Geyve. There was a tripartite unity, or if you want to add Jabarut, however many layers you add, it was a unity, they were all cohesive. But Descartes divides them. Things that can be quantified and things which are the products of your imagination or your belief.
In the first paragraph you just mentioned res extensa.
Yes.
Is it represent the extension?
Yes.
Verb?
Yes.
What is an extension of?
In other words, if you can measure something, it means it has some kind of extension. I don't mean physical extension necessarily.
To an extent, something.
In other words, you can measure it. It can be measured. Yeah. I mean, it will also have physicality. I mean, you can actually physically measure a table, but I mean, when you get to the subatomic level.
The extent of the table, for instance, you mean, right?
Yes. The table itself is unimportant. It's the measurements which are important.
So basically, the second kind does not have any extension.
No.
So it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And it can be dismissed. You can say, well, you can't prove it. You can't prove it. You can measure the velocity of, I don't know, something, right? You can work stuff out, you can calculate, you can do mathematical models and computer models, but you can't do that with patience, right? Or desire. And he said these are just products of the mind, and we can dismiss them. Okay, I mean, maybe you can have them and say that you have them, but they're not important.
Vicdani means vicdan.
Yes, Vijdan as well. You can't measure Vijdan. So I mean, why do they say that there's no soul? You know, modern psychologists don't believe in a soul; they believe in a mind. Why do they even believe in a mind? Well, they connect it to the brain. They say the brain is where the mind is. So they materialize everything. So abstract things disappear from Descartes' world. So the universe was one organic unity, and then the corporeal and the spiritual were fused, and the universe was seen as a hierarchy in all of our faiths, in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism. The universe is a hierarchy. It's a vast chain of being. It's a tree of being, if you wish. And the borders between the three are not hard borders, right? The border between Mulk and Malakut is not a hard border. Because we are stretched between Mulk and Malakut. as we know. We have a nafs, we have a ruh. We exist in mulk and malakut. The only border, of course, is the border where we get to pay or pay. Now this disappears after all of these upheavals. Remember, these upheavals are feeding into each other. You've got the Renaissance, you've got the voyages of discovery, you've got Newton, you've got Copernicus, you've got Galileo. You've got the Industrial Revolution, where human beings think now we're the champions. That strengthens their idea that God isn't important.
So the purpose of information has changed. In the past, it was for understanding the talisman of the universe, but later it's power. So
it's power. It's
yeah.
power. The Industrial Revolution began in my home city in Birmingham, in England.
So if an information doesn't give power, it's meaningless.
It's pointless, you know. Yeah, of course. And knowledge is power, and this is where the great knowledge explosion begins.
I think Muslims, again, I said, make this distinction, methodological materialism, let's say. So, as Ustad also does this, the realm of causes and realm of unity, right, Tawheed. So, in the realm of causes, you should only think about causes, and in the realm of unity, you should give everything to Allah. So, Muslims, I think, divided this into two, and in their methodology, they didn't put the, let's say, belief in that. So they were successful in it.
Yeah,
But
we'll get to the problem with Muslims in a bit.
maybe they needed this.
So for
this
Descartes,
separation.
for Descartes, there's no. We're a bit stuck for time because apparently we're going somewhere after this. There's no spiritual world for Descartes at all. All that really exists are things which have extension. In other words, things you can sense and measure. Things you can sense and measure. Feelings, values, all of these things are said to be things of the mind, right? So notions such as baraka, notions such as mu'jiza, notions such as malaika, all of these things are thrown out of the window. And also, they would throw God out of the window, but God had his purposes for them as a means of control. So God was kept, but he was powerless. If we go on to section 7, which is the penultimate slide, and I'm sorry I'm rushing through this, it's time constraint. So what the so-called scientific revolution does, it secularizes the universe. It empties the universe of every value other than the mathematical, the scientific value, and it banishes God to the sidelines. This is a practical reality, and it happened in the West. It's been happening for the past 500 years, and this is also the reason why the rest of the world has become secular, because we are feeding off the Western legacy. So, the universe is no longer dependent for its meaning on God. Meaning, from this point onwards, is to be found in the universe itself. And that's partly Aristotle's fault, for including God within creation, because that's never going to work. So, in short, with all of these upheavals, all of these revolutions, human beings are being indoctrinated to see the universe as something separate from themselves. We are not in that position. When Allah says that the sun is a lamp and the earth is a cradle, we become part of it. It becomes familiar to us. We see ourselves as one with creation. All of the presenters have been talking about how we are supposed to be at one with creation and how we see ourselves as one with creation. Even Said Nursi used to call the tree auntie tree or uncle tree, right? Because it's related, we're related, everything is related. But with the scientific revolution and all of these other upheavals that I've mentioned, this became separate. The world and the universe became separated from us, and it became an object of study. We saw ourselves as separate from it, or at least in the Western milieu, that's what happened. Human beings are taught to see the universe as something separate from themselves, something distant, something objective that is to be measured and controlled. Right? Rather than as something which is showing us the names of God, something with which we are intimately connected and which all of the time talks about our createdness, our dependence, our impotence, and our dependence on Allah. In other words, what the scientific revolution does, to summarize, it cuts the connection between the created realm and the creator. If you imagine that everything is linked to Allah by a golden chain, right? Everything is linked to Him by a golden chain. What this revolution does, it cuts all of those chains. The chains fall back on the things themselves, and then the chains rust. And then what do they attribute the things to? To themselves.
Nature.
To nature. So, yes, so the universe becomes ownerless, or rather it owns itself. So, people are no longer taught to seek meaning through representational forms. They have to seek meaning in the represented forms. Right? So when you look at the cherry tree as a Muslim, as a believer, it indicates so many names of God. But for the unbeliever, it indicates only itself. And there we have the mystery of Mane Ismi Mane Harfi, which again is another story. So in other words, instead of the creatures in the universe being signs that point to God, the connection is cut, and the creatures no longer point to God, they point to themselves. So instead of reflecting God, the universe no longer plays a reflecting role. It becomes actually and intentionally meaningless. Something that points to itself doesn't have any meaning, apart from some kind of maybe figurative, materialistic, utilitarian use. A cherry tree is only good for a carpenter. What would I want with a cherry tree? It's meaningless for me. You know, as an unbeliever, unless I'm a botanist, or unless I'm a carpenter, the cherry tree is pointless. The universe is pointless. Now, following that series of revolutions, and this is the final slide, the universe was believed only to point to itself. And then this is consolidated in the 19th century by Darwin. Right? The idea of evolution does away with God altogether. And this is why it annoys me so much today that we have Muslim theologians who are trying to justify evolution by compromising with the atheists by saying, okay, we also believe in evolution. We don't have a problem with evolution as long as you allow us to believe that Adam alayhi salam was not part of the evolutionary process. It's crazy. Which Western scientist is going to take that seriously? So we have Darwin, then we have Freud, right, who does away completely with the soul and with the spirit, and talks about the ego. By the way, some people have been using the word ego in the translations. We need to get rid of this word ego. Ego is a Freudian thing. We have nafs al-amara, we have ana, but we don't have ego. Section 8. Has the Muslim world lost its way? Unfortunately, we have. Unfortunately, we have. And the problem is that, of course, since we are Muslim, we take our iman for granted. You know, Allah says, "O you who believe, believe." Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu amanu billah. Right? Those of you who believe, believe. What does that mean?
Continuous action.
Yes. A friend of mine, just as a very, very quick digression, a very, very dear friend of mine, we used to go to our local mosque. It was a house converted to a mosque when we lived in student accommodation. And we used to go there and everyone used to say, for example, Assalamu alaikum akhi, how's your work? How's your job? How's your car? How's this? How's that? And my friend one day went in and said, Salam akhi, how's your iman? And they were shocked. and he got banned from the mosque. Honestly, honestly, he got banned. They said, "Don't come here again. We're Mu'min. We're believers. Why are you casting aspersions on our belief?" But this is a Quranic thing, you know. How is your imam today? So we have 4 problems. I've identified 4 problems. And of course, we have a lot more than 4 problems, but 4 main problems. Firstly, the search for meaning and affirmation of that meaning needs to be constant. When I go out and with my group and we teach Muslim teachers, they get shocked that we're talking about the signs of God and the names of God. Because they know the names of God just as a list. Right? A list in Aqidah. The signs of God are being revealed continuously. The Quran is being revealed to us continuously. And our world is never the same in 2 moments. After 1 moment, the world has changed. And then it's changed again, and it's changed again. And the signs are always coming, and we have to affirm and reaffirm the signs. Everyone's been saying this in their presentations. This is not new. Kullu yawmin huwa fi sha'n. What does that mean? Kullu yawm. Yawm is every, it could be day, it could be millisecond, it could be year, it could be moment. It's vague, right? It's not definite. Every moment he is in a new sha'n. So our reading of the signs, and this is why I tell them, this is why we have a problem. This is why we are secularized. This is why we suffer from the Western diseases that have happened over the last 500 years. This is why we're in this problem. Because we don't read the creation, right? Our reading needs to be continuous, constant, consistent. We need to be a conscious mirror. This is all from Risale. I don't tell them that. But this is all from Risale, and this is, by extension, all from Quran. The second problem here is the externalization of religion. Overemphasis on externals to the detriment of Iman. We externalize our faith. Most people understand a religious person as someone who goes to the mosque on Friday or someone who prays 5 times a day. We objectify our religion. There's nothing out there about Iman, about Usuli Iman, unless it's an Aqidah. There are no books like Risale in the Muslim world, unless they're from the medieval period, or the late medieval period. I went to Malaysia, not the last time I went, the time before, and they wanted to take us to this bookshop. They're saying, there's this amazing bookshop. You'll come, there's hundreds and hundreds of books. I went there and I was really, really hopeful. This half of the bookshop was on jihad. The other half was on fiqh. No books on Iman, no books on Ma'rifah. This is our problem. We think that Islam is best understood in practice, you know. There's a saying in England, British justice has to be seen to be done, right? We have the same attitude. Islam is something that has to be seen to be done. So we get a rift between Iman and Islam. We get lots of people who are Muslim, but they never think about Iman. Akhi, don't ask me how my Iman is. How dare you, right? I'm praying. Can't you see that I'm mu'min? I'm praying. So a kind of rift opens between Iman and Islam. And of course our classical scholars were scholars in Aql and Naql. But today it is all Naql. Even Sheikh Googles, right? All the Shuyukh on Google with their debates and everything, they don't talk about Iman. They're either debating or they're talking about some obscure point of fiqh. This is another problem. The third problem is the influence of Western and European culture on the Muslim world. And we can't understate this, right? And we may see ourselves as victims. And when I say, I mean, I'm European, I'm from England, but that's not a point at all. We may see ourselves as victims in the exchange, and we can point back to many historical events which have made things worse, right? Where the physical presence of the West in forms of colonialism, political colonialism, meant that they were in a position to ideologically subjugate us. But this does not absolve us, right? We still have a responsibility. We can't play the victim all the time. You know, it doesn't exonerate us from our uncritical acceptance of whatever comes from the West. We accept it because it's been peer reviewed, right? Do you know how peer review takes place in the West? You would be scandalized if I told you how peer review takes place in the West. 80%, there was an article, 80% of scientific papers which were published between a certain date, I think 1990 and 2005 or something, had not used the scientific method. The scientific method is about cause and effect, right? It's about proving cause and effect. They had not used the traditional scientific method. Another problem is, of course, we accept wholesale, the whole package, things like evolution, things like relativity, Newtonian physics, this current, that trend, this, we are uncritical in our acceptance. And this is why we fail. Secular education systems, we have taken the secular education systems that have been offered to us. Muslim lands have been decolonized physically, right? There's a whole list. Yeah, time, sorry, I'm almost finished. I'm on to the fourth one, almost. Muslim lands have been decolonized physically, but they have not been decolonized culturally. I'm having to shorten this because I'm being told. And Barish is a bit scary, so we have to begin. We saw it when he was being resurrected. We saw it, we got disqualified twice. I'm scared he'll tell
Chill,
me.
bro, chill.
Yeah, I'm scared he'll disqualify me a third time. And finally is the fetishization of science. And I have the most to say about this, but the least time. We suffer from such a sense of inferiority, right? We're so desperate to join the big boys, right? To join the scientific mainstream, to sit at the table with the big boys, that we are ready to sell our beliefs for a small price. The example was, and I know the person, and I don't want to name him, who's written a book on evolution which advocates notions such as randomness and chance, and the fact that, okay, we may have come from the same line as certain
Tree life?
yes, not from them, but from a common ancestor. But what he says, Adam alayhi salam is outside of that. Now, if you present that to a Western materialist, evolutionary biologist, he would just laugh. They say, look what the Muslims do. They're so backward. They don't even have the courage of their own convictions, you know. And now they're talking about Islam and extraterrestrials. Right? And the Islamic Secular is the new book by Sherman Jackson. I will name him and shame him. Sherman Jackson has written a book called The Islamic Secular, where he's trying to show that there is a notion of secularity in Islam. In other words, anything that is not subject to Sharia, he says, is secular. This is crazy. We already have the notion of ibaha, right? And within ibaha, you can make israf. You know, there are fiqhi rules for ibaha. Something which is mubah is not secular. So what they want to do is they want to compromise, they want to appease the Western players so that they can have a share of the cake. This is showing our inferiority, right? And what they're doing is they're accepting worldviews that are built on paradigms, Freudianism, Einstein as well, who made lots of mistakes and cheated in a lot of his so-called experiments. We have Newton, we have all of the things that I mentioned. These are paradigms which are based on some truths, some half-truths, ambiguities, outright falsehood, unsubstantiated assertions, and assumptions. And that gives us pseudoscience. Right? Most of the mainstream sciences today are pseudosciences because they're not testable. Most of what the Astronomers are giving us is observational. To a certain extent, you can say it's scientific. But Darwinism, evolution, is not testable. It's a pseudoscience. It masquerades as a science. You cannot subject it to the scientific method. And there are many other. Psychology is another one. You cannot subject. I'm sorry to the psychologists here. I love them dearly. But you cannot subject psychology to the scientific method. You can't. There are certain tests you can do. But psychology is a pseudoscience.
Yes.
Well, now, with the remaining time, can you also name mitigative actions? You know, what do we need to do?
Hocam,
Corrective actions.
We don't have
Actually,
time for the solution.
also, actually, you are
Solution is
invited.
Yes, thank you. The solution is the Risale Nur. The solution is to understand things as they are, as the Quran says, and the Risale Nur shows us how to do that. So, another thing, just final note. The notion that science and progress and goodness and well-being go together is indoctrinated into us from that age, right? When we go to school. Science is a magic word. If you say, oh, a scientist says it, or everyone believes. You know, science says that. So science is the new sihr. And then science and progress go together. Without science, actually, you can't have progress. Who said progress is always good? Okay? Invent an aeroplane that goes to Australia in 2 hours rather than in 24 hours. And then you've got extra 22 hours to waste your time. So how's that progress? Build a better atomic bomb so you can kill more people. That's progress. It is progress.
So says material progress is needed for spiritual.
Material progress that's benign. Right? It has to be benign. I'm not saying that airplanes are bad. I use them all the time. I've been on about 15 planes in the last 3 weeks. I still feel, that I'm on a plane. But it's become a fetish. Technology is a fetish. Science is a fetish. Sorry, this is like a 2-hour lecture. I don't do it in 2 hours. We have breaks and we have coffee, but I'm being told I have to finish. So I just hope, this is what I tell the people when they say, what happened? What happened in the West? This is what happened. And it was, it happened over 500 years, right? And when we sneeze, you guys catch cold. Because what happens there also comes here. And this is why Ustad wrote the 10th word, because he saw this happen.
It's very upsetting. Very upsetting.
I didn't want to upset you on the last night. Sorry.
Very upsetting.
It's a fact.
Maybe the similar problem is on the Muslim world as well. One of the higher religious affair officer asked one of the Muslim, what do you ask from us to mention in the mosques? Then the gentleman told him that in the mosques you are mentioning about you are mentioning about Saul, you are mentioning about Salah, but Allah is not mentioned.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we have that problem.
Even though in Quran, so many ayat are mentioning a lot of verses are mentioning about Allah. But even Muslim scholars are not mentioning too much in the mosque as well.
Hocam inşallah.
Do you have time for a couple of questions?
Maybe not hocam. We are already
I'm
delayed
sorry.
like 20 minutes.
Maybe over break.
Where are we going?
Oh no, I'm not going to be here because we're going over tomorrow. When I
İnşallah.
come back, people will still be around, yeah?
Yes, inşallah hocam. İnşallah.
Just half an hour ago.
Half
Yes.
an hour.
Ask the boss, I don't know where.
35 minutes. We'll give you another 5 minutes extra.
Thank you. I'm sorry anyway. Thanks for your
Hocam maybe Fatiha?
You are very free.
Can you give Fatiha maybe?
Yes.
How's he going to say
Thank you very much.
Finish.
Thank you.
Finish.